deep in the Bitterroot Valley of Montana, where cell towers fear to tread and the nearest neighbor lives 20 miles away. Marcus Stone hammered the final nail into what looked like an impossible dream. The 42-year-old construction worker had vanished from civilization 6 months earlier, claiming he needed time to think. What he actually built defied every law of physics his neighbors understood. Solar panels that generated power even in total darkness. Water systems that pulled moisture from thin air in quantities that should have been impossible. Heat pumps that worked efficiently at 40 below zero. When word spread through the valley, it attracted attention Marcus never wanted. Corporate executives in $1,000 suits began showing up at the local diner, asking questions. Government vehicles with tinted windows cruised the mountain roads, because Marcus Stone wasn't just a construction worker. He was a former Tesla engineer who'd walked away from a billion-dollar breakthrough, taking the blueprints with him. Now someone wanted those plans back, and they weren't asking nicely. But what exactly had Marcus discovered in those corporate labs that made his off-grid cabin worth killing for? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The hammer fell silent as Marcus stepped back, wiping sweat from his brow despite the October chill. His breath formed white clouds in the thin mountain air as he surveyed the structure that had consumed his every waking hour for the past 6 months. From the outside, the cabin looked deceptively simple. Weathered cedar siding, a metal roof, windows positioned to capture the southern exposure. But beneath its humble exterior lay technology that shouldn't exist. Not yet, anyway. Marcus ran his calloused fingers along the edge of a solar panel, its surface darker than any commercial unit. These weren't the silicon wafers everyone knew. These were something else entirely, built from specifications he'd memorized before walking out of Tesla's Gigafactory 2 with nothing but the clothes on his back and secrets worth more than most small countries' GDP. The panels hummed with an almost musical frequency, converting not just visible light but thermal radiation, electromagnetic noise, even the cosmic background radiation that permeated all of space. Energy from nothing, or so it appeared to anyone who didn't understand the quantum mechanics behind the breakthrough. A red-winged blackbird landed on the cabin's porch railing, cocking its head as if sensing something unusual. Animals had been acting strangely around the property for weeks. Deer approached closer than they should. Bears gave the area a wide berth. Even the insects seemed different, more active, more purposeful, as if the very air carried an electric charge that awakened something primal in their nervous systems. Marcus pulled his phone from his pocket, surprised to see a single bar of service. That was odd. Cell coverage had been non-existent when he'd first arrived at the old mining claim he'd purchased sight unseen with cash. But then again, a lot of things had changed since he'd activated the systems. 3 missed calls, all from the same blocked number. His jaw tightened. They'd found him. The first call had come 2 weeks ago, just after his initial test run of the water reclamation system. A polite voice with a slight accent, German, maybe Swiss, asking about his research projects and whether he might be interested in consulting opportunities. Marcus had hung up without responding. The second call came after he'd connected the heating system. This time, the voice was less polite, more direct. They knew who he was, knew what he'd taken, and wanted to discuss mutually beneficial arrangements. Again, Marcus had disconnected. The third call yesterday contained no pleasantries, just an address, the Grizzly Bear Diner in Hamilton, and a time, tonight, 8 o'clock. Come alone, Dr. Stone. We have much to discuss about your former employer's intellectual property. Dr. Stone. They were using his old title, from before he'd simplified his life, before he'd traded laboratory sterility for sawdust and honest sweat, before he'd witnessed what Prometheus Industries planned to do with his breakthrough. Marcus walked to the cabin's front window and peered down the valley. The gravel road that wound up to his property was empty, but that didn't mean much. Anyone with serious resources could approach from a dozen different directions. The old mining trails crisscrossed these mountains like a spider's web. most unmarked and forgotten by everyone, except locals, and people paid to know such things. Inside the cabin, banks of monitors displayed system status readings that would have made his former Tesla colleagues weep with envy. Energy input levels, storage capacity, distribution efficiency, all running at numbers that, according to published science, should have been impossible. The quantum cascade effect he'd discovered wasn't just theoretical anymore. It was humming quietly in the walls around him, pulling energy from the quantum foam itself, the underlying fabric of reality that most people never imagined existed. But Prometheus Industries knew it existed. They'd funded his research, built him a laboratory, given him unlimited resources to explore the bleeding edge of physics, right up until the moment he'd realized what they planned to do with unlimited, untraceable energy. Some discoveries were too dangerous to release into a world already teetering on the edge of chaos. The first reports came from hikers 3 weeks after Marcus vanished. They'd seen smoke rising from the deep valley beyond Copper Ridge, thin wisps that shouldn't have been there. Sarah Chen, the forest ranger who'd grown up in these mountains, knew every permitted campsite and fire zone by heart. That valley wasn't on any of them. She'd driven out to Marcus's trailer that morning, finding it exactly as the sheriff had left it. Coffee mug still on the kitchen table, work boots by the door, everything suggesting a man who'd stepped out for a moment and never returned. The only thing missing was Marcus himself and his grandfather's toolkit, a battered collection of hand tools that he'd carried to every job site for the past 15 years. At Murphy's diner, speculation ran as thick as the morning fog. Linda Murphy, wielding a coffee pot like a weapon, held court from behind the counter while the usual suspects occupied their regular stools. "Man finally cracked," announced Pete Kowalski, dragging his fork through a pile of hash browns. "Saw it coming for years. Too much time in his own head, that one." "Marcus Stone isn't crazy," Sarah said, sliding onto the end stool. She'd known Marcus since high school, had watched him work methodically through problems that would send other men into fits of rage. "He's methodical. Everything he does has a reason." "Then where the hell is he?" Pete shot back. "Normal folks don't disappear into the wilderness with a toolbox." Linda poured Sarah's coffee without being asked. "His supervisor at the construction company called again yesterday, said they've got projects backing up, wondering if they should post his position." Sarah stared into her cup, thinking about the smoke reports. 3 separate groups of hikers, all describing the same thing, consistent wisps rising from the valley floor, not the random pattern of a campfire, but something more sustained, more purposeful. "I'm going up there," she said finally. "Up where?" Linda asked. "The valley. Copper Ridge Trail. See what's making that smoke." Pete snorted. "Probably just some idiot college kids playing survivalist. You'll find a bunch of trust fund babies pretending to live off the land." But Sarah had a different theory, one she wasn't ready to share. Marcus had always been interested in sustainable systems, often sketching designs on napkins during their occasional coffee meetings. He talked about solar arrays and water collection, about living systems that could support themselves without outside input. She'd assumed it was just daydreaming, the kind of fantasy that helped construction workers get through another day of building someone else's vision. The hike to Copper Ridge took 4 hours, climbing through stands of lodgepole pine and across granite outcroppings that offered glimpses of the valley below. Sarah had expected to spot the smoke source from the ridge, but the valley floor remained hidden beneath a canopy of evergreens. What she could see troubled her more than smoke. Solar panels glinting between the trees, too many and too organized to be any camping setup she'd ever encountered. The descent proved treacherous, following game trails through deadfall and undergrowth that hadn't seen human passage in years. Except it had. Sarah found subtle signs of recent travel, branches bent aside and secured with strips of cloth, small cairns marking safe passage around unstable slopes. Someone had been using this route regularly, someone who understood how to move through wilderness without destroying it. The first structure appeared through the trees like something from a fever dream, a dome of salvaged materials, car hoods welded to steel sheeting, all of it covered in a patchwork of solar panels. rose from the forest floor with an elegance that defied its humble components. Water trickled through a series of pipes and channels, creating a musical backdrop to the scene. Sarah approached slowly, her ranger training warring with simple amazement. This wasn't some hippie commune or survival camp. The engineering was sophisticated, the construction precise. Solar panels fed into battery banks housed in weatherproof containers. A water wheel turned lazily in an artificial stream, generating additional power. Gardens stretched between the trees, raised beds filled with vegetables she didn't recognize. "You shouldn't have come." She spun toward the voice, hand instinctively moving to her radio. Marcus Stone stepped out from behind a storage shed, thinner than she remembered, but with an intensity in his eyes that was entirely new. "Marcus." Relief flooded through her. "Everyone's been worried sick. They think you're lost, or worse." "I'm not lost." He gestured toward the structures surrounding them. "I'm exactly where I need to be." "What is this place?" Marcus studied her face for a long moment, as if weighing whether she could handle the answer. In the distance, Sarah heard the sound of machinery. Not the crude noise of chainsaws or generators, but something more sophisticated, more purposeful. "It's what they don't want anyone to find," he said finally. "And now that you're here, they're going to know someone else is asking questions." The diner's morning crowd had thinned to just Marcus and an elderly rancher nursing black coffee 3 stools down. Sarah wiped the counter with deliberate strokes, her movements betraying the tension that had settled over Pine Ridge since word of Marcus's discovery began to spread. "You've got visitors coming," she said without looking up. "Black SUVs rolled through town an hour ago. Ask directions to your valley." Marcus felt his coffee turn to ash in his mouth. He'd expected this, but not so soon. "How many?" 3 vehicles, city plates. Sarah's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "They weren't tourists, Marcus." He left a $10 bill on the counter and headed for his truck, mind racing. The corporate interest he'd feared was materializing faster than he'd anticipated. His sustainable housing project, built with revolutionary bioconcrete that could sequester carbon while providing superior insulation, had caught the wrong kind of attention. The drive back to his valley felt different now. Each familiar turn weighted with new danger. Marcus had spent 6 months perfecting his construction techniques in isolation, developing materials that could change how humanity built shelter. The houses weren't just energy efficient, they actively improved the environment around them. But that wasn't what had drawn corporate vultures to Montana. Marcus parked at his usual spot and hiked the final mile to his settlement. The cluster of dome-shaped structures nestled into the landscape like something from another world, their surfaces shimmering with an almost organic quality. Solar collectors disguised as natural rock formations powered the small community, while underground cisterns collected and purified rainwater through biofiltration systems he'd developed. The settlement could house 30 people comfortably while leaving virtually no environmental footprint. It was exactly what a climate-changed world needed. It was also built on top of the largest undiscovered rare earth mineral deposit in North America. Marcus had found the geological surveys buried in old mining company archives, cross-referenced with recent satellite imaging that showed unusual mineral signatures in his chosen valley. He deliberately selected this location not despite the mineral wealth below, but because of it. The rare earth elements were worth billions to tech companies desperate for battery components and renewable energy infrastructure. But extracting them would devastate the landscape and contaminate water sources for hundreds of miles downstream. His sustainable settlement served as both prototype and fortress, a demonstration that this land could serve humanity's future without destroying it, and a physical barrier preventing easy access to the minerals below. The sound of helicopter rotors cut through the mountain air. Marcus moved quickly to his main residence, a larger dome that served as workshop and command center. Inside, banks of computers monitored everything from soil composition to air quality, documenting the settlement's positive environmental impact with scientific precision. He activated encrypted communication protocols he'd hoped never to use. His fingers flew across the keyboard, uploading terabytes of construction data, environmental studies, and geological surveys to secure servers around the world. If something happened to him, this information would automatically release to environmental groups, engineering journals, and investigative reporters simultaneously. The helicopter's noise grew louder. Through his workshop's windows, Marcus watched 3 black aircraft settle onto the meadow below his settlement. Men in expensive suits emerged, their city shoes comically inappropriate for the terrain. But the security team that followed them moved with military precision, and their gear suggested they weren't planning a friendly conversation. Marcus recognized the lead figure even from this distance, Richard Blackstone, CEO of Titan Industries, one of the most powerful mining conglomerates in the world, with a reputation for making environmental obstacles disappear through legal intimidation, political pressure, or more direct methods. His satellite phone buzzed. "Unknown number. Mr. Stone? This is Richard Blackstone. I believe you know why I'm here." Marcus watched the distant figures begin their climb toward his settlement. "I build houses, Blackstone. Legal houses on land I own. You built them on mineral rights that predate your property deed by 60 years. Blackstone's voice carried the casual confidence of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. "My geological team identified extraction opportunities worth approximately $40 billion beneath your little experiment. And my little experiment proves this land is worth more left undisturbed." Blackstone's laugh was cold. "Idealism doesn't power cities, Stone. Those minerals will fuel the renewable energy revolution. Surely even an environmentalist can appreciate that irony." Marcus closed his eyes. The classic paradox, destroying the environment to save it. The environmental cost of extraction will outweigh any benefits by orders of magnitude. That's not your decision to make. Through his window, Marcus could see the advance team had reached his outer perimeter. They moved with purpose, examining his structures with instruments that probably detected everything from structural integrity to hidden passages. His phone buzzed with an incoming text from Sarah. "Sheriff got called away on emergency. Won't be back for hours." Of course he did. Marcus Stone looked around his workshop one last time, then began activating systems that would ensure his work survived whatever came next. The coffee at Mel's diner had grown cold an hour ago, but Sarah Chen barely noticed. Her laptop screen glowed with satellite images of the valley where Marcus Stone had vanished, each photograph more puzzling than the last. The thermal readings she'd pulled from the Geological Survey database showed heat signatures that made no sense for an empty wilderness area. "You look like someone who's seen a ghost," Deputy Jake Morrison said, sliding into the booth across from her. His uniform was wrinkled, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. "Maybe I have." Sarah turned the laptop toward him. "Look at these heat patterns from 3 weeks ago. See those geometric shapes? That's not natural geological activity." Jake squinted at the screen, then at Sarah. "You're the geologist from Denver, right? The one asking questions about stone?" "Environmental consultant, and yes, I'm asking questions because something's very wrong out there." She pulled up another image. "This thermal signature suggests some kind of industrial operation, but there's no permitted activity in that area, nothing on any of the state databases." The bell above the diner's door chimed, and Sarah looked up to see a woman in an expensive suit scanning the room. Their eyes met briefly, and something cold passed between them before the woman turned and left without ordering. "Friend of yours?" Jake asked, following Sarah's gaze. "Never seen her before." But that wasn't entirely true. Sarah had noticed the same woman at her hotel yesterday, and again at the gas station this morning. "Deputy Morrison, what do you know about Marcus Stone?" Jake's expression hardened. He was a good man, quiet, kept to himself but solid, worked construction for 20 years, never caused trouble. Then one day he just snapped, I guess. Started talking about saving the world, bought up that valley, and disappeared. People don't just snap without reason. What triggered it? His daughter. The words came out heavy with old pain. Emma Stone died 3 years ago from some rare cancer. Doctors said it was environmental, something in her system that shouldn't have been there. Marcus blamed the chemical plant upriver, but they had all their permits, passed all their inspections. Sarah felt pieces clicking into place. Holbrook Industries? Jake's head snapped up. How did you? They're my client. They hired me to do an environmental impact assessment of the area before they expand operations. She paused, studying his reaction. They told me a mentally unstable man was squatting on adjacent land and might pose a security risk. That's bullshit. Jake's voice carried anger that surprised them both. Sorry, but Marcus Stone isn't crazy. Desperate, maybe. Angry, definitely, but not crazy. Sarah closed the laptop and leaned forward. I think you're right, and I think whatever he built out there, Holbrook doesn't want it found. The diner's atmosphere seemed to shift, conversations growing quieter. Jake glanced around nervously before lowering his voice. What makes you say that? Because they're paying me 3 times my usual rate to file a report that says the area is geologically unstable and unsuitable for any development. They want the entire valley condemned. Sarah pulled out her phone and showed him a text message. And because my project manager just ordered me back to Denver immediately. No explanation. Jake was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against the table. Finally, he looked up. What are you going to do? I'm going to find Marcus Stone. The valley's dangerous. Search and rescue couldn't even... Search and rescue was looking for a lost hiker. I'm looking for something else entirely. Sarah gathered her things and stood. Those heat signatures aren't random. They're organized, purposeful. Someone's running a sophisticated operation out there. Even if that's true, you can't just hike into the wilderness alone. Sarah paused at the booth's edge. I don't suppose you'd be interested in some unofficial overtime? Jake's radio crackled to life before he could answer. All units, we have a 10 to 54 at the Holbrook facility. Possible hazmat situation. Deputy Morrison, respond immediately. On my way, Jake replied into the radio, then looked at Sarah. Speak of the devil. As they walked toward the exit, Sarah noticed the same expensive sedan from earlier parked across the street, engine running. Through the windshield, she could see the woman in the suit talking animatedly on her phone. Deputy, Sarah said quietly, I think we're being watched. Jake followed her gaze, and his hand instinctively moved toward his weapon. Stay close. They exited together, and the sedan immediately pulled away, tires squealing slightly on the asphalt. Jake memorized the license plate, while Sarah photographed the retreating vehicle. This just got a lot more complicated, Jake muttered. Sarah's phone buzzed with another message from her supervisor. Return to Denver now. Do not file any reports. Project terminated. She deleted the message and looked at Jake. When do we leave for the valley? The sheriff's office in Pine Ridge had seen better decades. Deputy Sarah Chen sat at her desk, staring at the missing person report she'd been putting off filing for 3 days. Marcus Stone, age 34, last seen heading toward the Blackfoot Valley with enough supplies to last a week, maybe 2 if he rationed carefully. That was 6 months ago. You planning to actually submit that, or just wear a hole in the paper with your eyes? Sheriff Tom Bradley emerged from his office, coffee mug in hand, his weathered face creased with the kind of concern that came from 30 years of small-town policing. Something doesn't sit right about this, Tom. Sarah tapped her pen against the desk. Marcus Stone wasn't the type to just disappear. Ask anyone in town, reliable as clockwork, paid his bills on time, never missed a day of work until he took that leave of absence. People snap, Chen. Especially quiet ones. They bottle things up until something breaks. Tom settled into the chair across from her desk. His supervisor at the construction company said he'd been asking strange questions about sustainable building techniques, off-grid systems. Maybe he decided to go back to nature permanently. Sarah shook her head. Then why hasn't anyone found a body? We've had 3 search parties comb those woods. Fish and Wildlife did flyovers. Nothing. It's like he vanished into thin air. The bell above the front door chimed. and both officers looked up to see Elena Vasquez entering, her expensive hiking boots clicking against the worn linoleum. The environmental lawyer had been making regular appearances at the sheriff's office, asking about Marcus ever since word of his disappearance had spread. "Any updates on the Stone case?" Elena asked, approaching the desk with a kind of purposeful stride that suggested she wasn't easily dismissed. "Ma'am, we've discussed this," Tom said, rising from his chair. "Missing persons investigations take time. If we had any significant developments—" "6 months, Sheriff. A man doesn't just disappear for 6 months without leaving some trace." Elena's voice carried an edge that made Sarah look up from her paperwork. "Unless someone doesn't want him found." "What's that supposed to mean?" Sarah asked. Elena hesitated, as if weighing how much to reveal. "Marcus Stone contacted our firm 8 months ago. He wanted to discuss patent applications for what he called revolutionary sustainable technologies. We scheduled a meeting, but he never showed up." Tom frowned. "You never mentioned this before. Client confidentiality." "But given the circumstances," Elena pulled out a folder from her briefcase. "He sent these preliminary sketches ahead of our meeting. Water purification systems, energy generation methods, building techniques, all using principles I've never seen before." Sarah studied the drawings Elena spread across her desk. The technical diagrams were intricate, showing structures that seemed to work with natural systems rather than against them. But what caught her attention were the notes scribbled in the margins, references to corporate interference and suppression protocols. "These look advanced," Sarah said. "Where would a construction worker learn this kind of engineering?" "That's what I've been wondering," Elena replied. "Marcus Stone graduated from Montana State with a degree in environmental engineering, summa cum laude. He wasn't just some guy with a hammer." Tom scratched his chin. "So why was he working construction?" "Because 3 years ago, he was fired from Econotech Industries for what they called unauthorized research activities," Elena continued. "I did some digging after he contacted us. He was developing clean energy prototypes that the company claimed violated his employment contract." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Montana weather. "What kind of prototypes?" "The kind that could make fossil fuels obsolete." Elena's voice dropped to almost a whisper. Marcus Stone might have been onto something that certain people would prefer stayed buried. The office fell silent except for the ticking of the old wall clock. Sarah looked at the sketches again, noting the sophisticated understanding of environmental systems they demonstrated. This wasn't the work of someone having a mental breakdown. "Sheriff," she said slowly, "I think we need to expand our search parameters." Tom nodded grimly. "Agreed. But Chen, if what Miss Vasquez is suggesting has any truth to it, we might be dealing with more than just a missing person case." Elena gathered up the sketches. "There's something else you should know. Econotech Industries just purchased mineral rights to a significant portion of the Blackfoot Valley, the same area where Marcus was last seen." "When?" Sarah asked. 2 weeks ago. They've already started conducting geological surveys in the region." Sarah stood up, her decision made. "I'm going back out there. If Marcus Stone built something in those woods, something worth hiding, then we need to find it before someone else does." As Elena left the office, Sarah caught Tom's eye. They both understood that this case had just become something much larger and more dangerous than a simple missing person investigation. The corporate helicopter touched down at the edge of Bear Creek Valley just as the morning mist began to lift. Sarah Chen stepped out first, her designer boots slipping slightly on the dew-covered grass. Behind her, 2 men in dark suits emerged, their eyes already scanning the tree line with practiced wariness. "Remember," she said, adjusting her tablet case, "we're here as environmental consultants conducting a routine assessment, nothing more." The taller man, Harrison, nodded curtly. His partner, Vega, was already unpacking what looked like surveying equipment, but contained far more sophisticated monitoring devices. They'd done this dance before in 3 different states, always arriving after someone had built something that threatened the careful balance Meridian Industries had spent decades protecting. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from her handler in Billings' local sheriff asking questions about Stone. Handle carefully. She deleted the message and followed the rough trail Marcus had carved through the undergrowth 6 months earlier. The intelligence reports had been sketchy, a hermit building something in the wilderness, possibly some kind of alternative energy project. Nothing that should have triggered Meridian's early warning systems, except for one detail that had sent shockwaves through the corporate headquarters. Marcus Stone had worked for them once. Not directly, of course. He'd been subcontracted through a subsidiary of a subsidiary, part of a waste management project in Nevada that had gone very wrong. Officially, the project had been shut down due to budget constraints. Unofficially, they'd buried it along with 3 whistleblowers and an EPA investigator who'd gotten too curious. Stone was supposed to have been just another construction grunt, someone who built what he was told to build and forgot about it afterward. But his name had appeared on some very sensitive documents, and when those documents had disappeared from a secured facility in Reno, Meridian's security division had flagged him as a person of interest. Now he was building something in the Montana wilderness, and that was a coincidence Sarah's employers couldn't afford to ignore. The valley opened up before them like something from a nature documentary, pristine, untouched, beautiful, except for the impossible structure rising from its center. "Jesus Christ," Vega whispered, lowering his binoculars. Sarah felt her breath catch. The intelligence reports hadn't done it justice. The building seemed to grow organically from the landscape itself, its curved walls blending seamlessly with the natural contours of the land. Solar collectors glinted like scales along the roofline, but they were integrated so perfectly that they looked more like geological formations than technology. But it was the energy signature that made her blood run cold. The devices hidden in Vega's equipment case were already picking up readings that shouldn't exist. The electromagnetic field surrounding the structure was unlike anything in the conventional renewable energy spectrum. It was clean, incredibly efficient, and completely impossible according to everything Meridian scientists understood about current technology, unless Stone had taken more than just documents from Nevada. "We need to get closer," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. They descended into the valley, moving carefully through the tall grass. With each step, the readings on their concealed monitors grew stronger. Whatever Marcus had built, it wasn't just generating clean energy, it was generating more energy than it should be possible to extract from solar and wind sources alone. Harrison tapped her shoulder and pointed toward a small grove of trees near the structure. Through the foliage they could see movement. Someone was home. Sarah made a quick decision. "Vega, circle around to the east side. Get whatever readings you can. Harrison, you're with me. We're going to make contact." "Ma'am, if he recognizes you from Nevada, he was just a construction worker. Middle management doesn't shake hands with bulldozer operators." But even as she said it, Sarah felt a chill of uncertainty. The man who'd built this impossible structure wasn't just a construction worker. Either he'd had help from people with advanced degrees in theoretical physics, or Marcus Stone was much more than his employment records indicated. They approached the main entrance, a simple wooden door that looked hand-carved. Before Sarah could knock, it opened. Marcus Stone stood in the doorway, and Sarah's carefully rehearsed introduction died in her throat. This wasn't the rough-edged laborer she'd expected. His eyes were sharp, intelligent, and filled with a wariness that suggested he knew exactly why they were here. "You're early," he said quietly. "I didn't expect Meridian to send someone for another few weeks." Sarah's hand moved instinctively toward her jacket pocket, where a small device could summon their helicopter in minutes. Behind Marcus, she caught glimpses of the interior, impossibly clean technology, computer displays showing energy output figures that made her knees weak. "Mr. Stone," she said, abandoning any pretense of being an environmental consultant. "I think we need to talk." Marcus stepped aside, gesturing them into his sanctuary. "Yes, Miss Chen, I believe we do." The fluorescent lights in the Kalispell Public Library hummed overhead as Sarah Chen scrolled through another database, her eyes burning from hours of screen time. She'd been here since opening, diving deeper into Marcus Stone's past than she'd ever intended when this assignment began. What started as a human interest piece about a hermit's sustainable paradise had morphed into something far more complex. Her notebook lay open beside the computer, filled with fragments that didn't quite fit together. Marcus's employment history showed steady work with construction crews across 3 states, but there were gaps, months at a time, where he seemed to vanish from public records entirely. More intriguingly, his last employer before disappearing into the Montana wilderness was Titan Industries, a massive conglomerate with interests spanning from mining to energy development. Sarah pulled up Titan's corporate website, its sleek interface promising innovation and environmental responsibility. The irony wasn't lost on her, considering what Marcus had said about corporations and their true relationship with the environment. She clicked through press releases, annual reports, and executive biographies, looking for any connection to sustainable technology or the kind of revolutionary innovations Marcus claimed to possess. A name caught her attention: Dr. Elena Vasquez, Titan's former head of research and development, who had abruptly left the company 18 months ago. According to the sparse information available, she'd been leading a team focused on next-generation energy solutions before her departure. Sarah made a note to track down more information about Vasquez and her research. The library's ancient printer wheezed as it produced copies of patent filings she'd discovered. Several belonged to Titan Industries, covering everything from advanced battery technology to revolutionary water purification systems. The dates were telling, all filed within the past 2 years, well after Marcus had begun his hermitage in the mountains. "Excuse me," a voice said behind her. Sarah turned to find an elderly man with silver hair and intelligent eyes. He wore a worn flannel shirt and carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to being listened to. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he continued, "but I couldn't help noticing you're researching Titan Industries. I'm Robert Clearwater. I used to work for the EPA before I retired here." Sarah introduced herself, explaining her story about Marcus Stone and his sustainable compound. Robert's expression grew increasingly serious as she spoke. "Marcus Stone," he repeated thoughtfully. "I knew that name sounded familiar. He was mentioned in some reports that crossed my desk before I retired. Titan was involved in a project up near Glacier. Officially, it was geological surveying for potential mining operations. Unofficially," he paused, glancing around the nearly empty library, "can we speak somewhere more private?" 20 minutes later, they sat in a corner booth at a small cafe downtown. Robert stirred his coffee slowly, choosing his words carefully. "There were concerns within the agency about what Titan was really doing up there," he began. "The mining surveys were cover for something else, research into alternative energy sources. We suspected they were testing technology that could revolutionize power generation, but every time we tried to investigate, we hit bureaucratic walls. Permits that should have taken months were approved overnight. Environmental impact studies that should have been mandatory simply disappeared from the review process." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. "What kind of technology?" "That's where it gets interesting. Our sources suggested they were working on something that could make fossil fuels obsolete virtually overnight. Clean, abundant energy that could be generated anywhere with minimal environmental impact." Robert leaned forward. "The kind of breakthrough that would be worth billions to whoever controls it, and worth even more to those who profit from maintaining the status quo. And you think Marcus was involved in this research?" "I think Marcus Stone knew more about what Titan was really doing than they were comfortable with. And I think whatever he built in those mountains might be connected to technology that some very powerful people would prefer stayed buried." Sarah's mind raced through the implications. Marcus's sophisticated compound, his claims about revolutionary sustainable technology, his obvious paranoia about corporate surveillance. It was all starting to make sense. "There's something else," Robert added, his voice dropping lower. About 3 months ago, I heard through old contacts that Titan was quietly assembling a team to investigate unauthorized technology deployment in western Montana. They're actively looking for something, and they're being very discreet about it. As Sarah drove back toward the mountains, Robert's words echoed in her mind. She thought about Marcus's compound, hidden in its remote valley like a technological oasis. What if it wasn't just the product of one man's ingenuity and determination? What if he'd taken something from Titan, knowledge, plans, or actual technology, and used it to build his sustainable paradise? The question that troubled her most was what Titan might do to get it back, and what they might do to anyone who threatened to expose the truth about what they'd lost. The manila envelope arrived at Sarah Chen's desk 3 days after Marcus Stone's disappearance from the hospital. No return address, no postmark, just her name written in block letters across cream-colored paper that felt expensive between her fingers. Inside, she found photographs that made her stomach lurch. Aerial shots of the valley, but not recent ones. These were dated 18 months ago, before Marcus had ever set foot in that wilderness. The landscape looked different, scarred, with geometric patterns carved into the earth like some massive industrial operation had been hastily abandoned. Sarah spread the photos across her desk, her investigative instincts overriding the voice in her head that whispered she was diving too deep into dangerous waters. Each image revealed more details: heavy machinery tracks, concrete foundations partially buried, and what looked like the remnants of a drilling operation far larger than anything a single construction worker could have managed. Her phone buzzed. "Unknown number. You got the package." The voice was male, older, with the careful cadence of someone accustomed to choosing words precisely. Who is this? Someone who knew Marcus before he became the valley's mystery man. "You want answers about what he really built out there? Meet me at the Copper Creek Diner in an hour. Come alone, and bring the photos." The line went dead. Sarah stared at the images scattered across her desk. Every journalistic instinct screamed that this was either the break she needed or a trap she'd never escape. She thought about Marcus, unconscious in a hospital bed 2 counties away, and Elena's terrified face when she'd described the men who'd taken him. The Copper Creek Diner sat on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where truckers and ranchers grabbed coffee before dawn and where conversations disappeared into the ambient noise of clinking silverware and diesel engines outside. Sarah arrived 15 minutes early, choosing a corner booth with clear sightlines to both entrances. The man who approached her table looked like he'd stepped out of a corporate boardroom, despite his attempts at casual dress. His jeans were too new, his flannel too perfectly pressed, but his eyes held the weight of someone carrying dangerous knowledge. "Miss Chen, thank you for coming." He slid into the booth across from her, declining her offer to order coffee. "My name is David Hartwell. Until 6 months ago, I was a senior geologist for Titan Energy Corporation." Sarah's pulse quickened. Titan Energy, one of the largest extraction companies in the region, with tentacles reaching into mining, oil, and natural gas operations across the Northwest. "Those photos you received show the valley as we left it," Hartwell continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "What Marcus Stone discovered out there wasn't some pristine wilderness perfect for sustainable living. It was our abandoned test site." "Test site for what?" Hartwell's hands trembled slightly as he leaned forward. "Experimental hydraulic fracturing techniques. We'd been developing new methods for extracting natural gas from previously inaccessible deposits. The valley sits on top of one of the largest untapped reserves in Montana." Sarah felt pieces clicking into place. But something went wrong. Catastrophically wrong. The experimental process destabilized more than we anticipated. Ground contamination, water table damage, seismic activity that registered on instruments 3 states away. Titan shut down the operation and buried all evidence of it ever existing. We thought we'd contained the damage, until Marcus found it. Marcus Stone has a background in environmental engineering that goes far beyond construction work. His military service included specialized training in environmental cleanup and remediation. When he started building in that valley, he wasn't just creating some sustainable homestead. He was systematically cleaning up our mess. Sarah's mind raced through the implications, the solar arrays, the water systems, even his building methods, all designed to repair environmental damage while creating the appearance of simple off-grid living. Marcus figured out what we'd done and decided to fix it quietly without exposing the contamination that would have destroyed the entire region's water supply. The weight of revelation settled over Sarah like a physical presence. "Why are you telling me this?" Hartwell's expression darkened. "Because Titan discovered what he was doing. They can't allow his cleanup methods to become public knowledge. It would expose the original contamination, cost them billions in lawsuits and cleanup fees across dozens of other sites. They've been watching him for months, and now they've taken him. Now they're going to make him disappear permanently, along with anyone who knows too much about what he accomplished." Hartwell stood abruptly, his nervousness finally overwhelming his resolve. "I've told you what I can. What you do with that information is up to you, but understand, Titan Energy has resources and connections that reach into every level of government and law enforcement in this state." He turned to leave, then paused. "Miss Chen, Marcus Stone isn't just some eccentric hermit. He's probably the only person who fully understands how to reverse the environmental damage that companies like Titan have been hiding for decades. If they kill him, that knowledge dies with him." Sarah watched him walk away, leaving her alone with photographs that suddenly felt radioactive and a story that could either save Marcus Stone or get them both killed. The laboratory hidden beneath the Apex Industries facility hummed with sterile efficiency, its banks of monitors casting blue light across Dr. Elena Vasquez's weathered face. She pulled off her reading glasses and rubbed her tired eyes, the weight of 30 years in corporate research pressing down on her shoulders like lead. The data streams flowing across her screens told a story that made her stomach churn. Carbon emissions, chemical runoff patterns, atmospheric composition readings, all pointing to the same inevitable conclusion that had haunted her since she'd first joined Apex's environmental division decades ago. "Still burning the midnight oil, Elena?" She turned to find Richard Cross standing in the doorway, his expensive suit somehow still crisp despite the late hour. The regional director's smile never reached his eyes, a characteristic she'd grown to despise over their years of forced collaboration. "Someone has to monitor the Montana situation," she replied, gesturing at the satellite feeds tracking Marcus Stone's valley. "This man's work is making our board nervous." Cross stepped closer, his polished shoes clicking against the concrete floor. "And why exactly should one hermit with delusions of grandeur concern Apex Industries?" Elena pulled up a series of atmospheric readings on her main display. The numbers painted a stark picture: air quality improvements in a 50-mile radius around Stone's settlement, carbon absorption rates that defied conventional models, energy signatures that suggested technology far beyond typical off-grid solutions. "Because he's not delusional," she said quietly. "Look at these readings, Richard. Whatever he's built out there, it's working, actually working." The silence stretched between them as Cross studied the data. Elena watched his expression shift from casual interest to focused attention to something approaching concern. "How is this possible?" he asked finally. Elena pulled up another screen, showing molecular analysis reports from water samples collected downstream from Stone's Valley. "He's found something, Richard, or developed something. The water coming out of that valley is cleaner than anything nature produces on its own. The soil composition shows biological activity that shouldn't exist at that elevation. And the energy readings," she trailed off, calling up thermal imaging data that made Cross lean forward despite himself. "The entire valley is generating more energy than it consumes," she continued. "Not just the structures, the ecosystem itself. It's like he's created a closed loop that actually improves the environment while supporting human habitation." Cross was quiet for a long moment, his mind clearly working through implications that extended far beyond environmental curiosity. Elena knew that look. It was the same expression he'd worn when they'd buried her climate change reports 5 years ago, the same calculating coldness that had greeted her warnings about long-term sustainability. "Who else has access to this data?" he asked. "Just my team." "But Richard, we need to contain this." His voice cut through her words like a blade. Immediately, Elena felt her heart sink as she recognized the familiar pattern. Another breakthrough that threatened corporate interests. Another discovery that would disappear into Apex's classified files. "This could change everything," she pressed. "Climate change, energy independence, sustainable agriculture, if Stone has actually solved these problems. If Stone has solved these problems, he's created a trillion-dollar threat to every energy company on the planet." Cross moved to her workstation, his fingers dancing across the keyboard with practiced efficiency, including ours. Elena watched in growing horror as he began encrypting her research files, burying months of work behind security protocols that would make the data effectively disappear. "You can't do this," she said. "People have a right to know." "People have a right to stability," Cross replied without looking up from her computer. "Economic stability, energy sector stability, political stability. What Stone has done threatens all of that." The screens went dark one by one as he locked down her research. Years of environmental data, atmospheric readings, chemical analyses, all of it vanishing into Apex's classified archives. "I want a full field team deployed to Montana within 24 hours, Cross said, turning back to face her. "Geological survey cover story. I need to know exactly what Stone has built and how he built it." Elena stood slowly, her legs unsteady beneath her. "And then?" Cross's smile returned, cold and calculating. "Then we make sure the technology ends up in the right hands." She understood the implication immediately. Apex wouldn't destroy Stone's work. They'd steal it, weaponize it, turn environmental salvation into another tool for corporate control. "I won't be part of this," she said. "Yes, you will." Cross moved toward the door, pausing to look back at her. "Because you know what happens to Apex employees who don't maintain appropriate discretion about classified projects." After he left, Elena stood alone in the darkened laboratory, surrounded by blank monitors and the hum of machines designed to catalogue the slow death of the planet. Through the small window high on the wall, she could see the first pale hints of dawn creeping across the sky. Somewhere in Montana, a man who'd been written off as crazy had potentially saved the world, and she was about to help destroy him. Sarah's hands trembled as she scrolled through the encrypted files Marcus had given her, each document more damning than the last. The coffee shop's Wi-Fi barely handled the large file transfers, but she couldn't risk using her home internet, not after what she'd discovered about Titan Industries' surveillance capabilities. The first folder contained environmental impact studies that Titan had buried for over a decade. Groundwater contamination levels that exceeded federal limits by factors of 10, soil samples showing heavy metal concentrations that would take centuries to remediate, internal memos discussing acceptable loss of life in rural communities. But it was the second folder that made her stomach turn. Project Clearwater wasn't just about hiding pollution, it was about creating it. Titan had been deliberately contaminating water sources across Montana, Colorado, and Wyoming, creating environmental crises that would require their proprietary solutions. Solutions that cost taxpayers billions while enriching Titan's shareholders. Marcus had been right. They weren't just covering up damage, they were manufacturing disasters. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Stop digging or join your friend in the wilderness permanently." Sarah's blood ran cold. She looked around the coffee shop, studying every face. The businessman in the corner typing on his laptop, the college student with headphones, the elderly woman reading a paperback novel. Any of them could be watching her. She quickly transferred the files to 3 separate secure cloud accounts, then wiped her laptop's browser history. As she packed up her things, her phone rang. "Detective Morrison. Sarah, we need to talk. Can you meet me at the station?" "What's this about?" "Marcus Stone. We found something." 20 minutes later, Sarah sat across from Morrison in the Stark interview room, her pulse hammering against her throat. The detective's expression was grim as he slid a manila folder across the table. Search and rescue found these about 5 miles from Stone's construction site, Morrison said, buried under a rock slide that happened sometime in the last 2 weeks. Sarah opened the folder. Marcus's wallet, his watch, his work boots, all damaged, stained with what looked like blood. We're treating this as a homicide investigation now, Morrison continued. Question is, who wanted Marcus Stone dead? Sarah's mind raced. Should she tell Morrison about the files, about Titan Industries, or would that put the detective in danger too? There's something else, Morrison said, leaning forward. The coroner examined those bloodstains. The blood type matches Stone, but there's something odd. The blood shows traces of a powerful sedative, something you'd use to incapacitate someone before. He gestured at the evidence. Before what? Before making them disappear permanently. Sarah felt the walls closing in. If Marcus was dead, she was the only one left who knew the truth about Titan Industries, the only one who could expose their crimes. Detective, there's something you need to know about Marcus, about what he discovered. Morrison raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. Before Sarah could speak, the interview room door burst open. A man in an expensive suit strode in, followed by 2 others who had the unmistakable bearing of private security. Detective Morrison, the suit said, flashing credentials. Agent Reeves, Department of Homeland Security. This investigation falls under federal jurisdiction now. We'll be taking over. Morrison stood, his hand instinctively moving toward his weapon. I wasn't notified of any federal interest in this case. You are now. Reeves nodded to his companions. Miss Chen, we need you to come with us for questioning regarding national security matters. Sarah's throat went dry. National security? This is about environmental crimes, not terrorism. Environmental terrorism is still terrorism, Ms. Chen. When someone threatens critical infrastructure operations, it becomes our concern. Morrison stepped between Sarah and the federal agents. She's not going anywhere without a warrant. This is still my jurisdiction until I see proper paperwork. Reeves smiled coldly. Detective, I'd hate for your department to lose federal funding over a jurisdictional dispute, especially when budget cuts are being discussed at the state level. The threat hung in the air like toxic gas. Sarah watched Morrison's jaw clench as he weighed his options. She knew he wanted to protect her, but he was outgunned. It's okay, Sarah said quietly. I'll go with them. Smart choice, Reeves said. Your cooperation will be noted in our report. As they escorted her from the room, Sarah caught Morrison's eye. She mouthed 2 words, find Marcus. The detective nodded almost imperceptibly. Outside, a black SUV waited with tinted windows and government plates. As they drove away from the police station, Sarah realized she was completely alone now. No Marcus, no allies, no backup plan. But she still had one advantage they didn't know about. The files were already uploaded, already spreading through secure networks to journalists and environmental lawyers across the country. Even if Titan Industries silenced her permanently, the truth would survive. The question was whether she would. The satellite phone crackled to life in Elena's hands as they descended the mountain trail. Marcus moved ahead with practiced ease, but Elena could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes constantly swept their surroundings. Behind them, smoke still rose from what remained of his sanctuary. This is Vasquez, she answered, keeping her voice low. Elena, thank God. It was Director Harrison, and he sounded rattled. Where the hell are you? I've got 3 dead agents and a congressional inquiry breathing down my neck. Elena glanced at Marcus, who had stopped walking and turned to face her. I'm pursuing the investigation, sir. The situation is more complex than we initially... Complex? 3 federal agents are dead, Elena. Agent Morrison's body was found this morning with enough fentanyl in his system to kill a horse. And now I'm hearing chatter about Meridian Global mobilizing private security contractors. The words hit Elena like a physical blow. Morrison dead. She thought of his quick smile, his terrible jokes during surveillance shifts. Her grip tightened on the phone. "Sir, I need you to listen carefully. This goes deeper than we thought. Meridian Global isn't just covering up environmental violations. They're eliminating anyone who threatens their lithium monopoly, including federal agents." A long pause. When Harrison spoke again, his voice was different, careful, measured. "Elena, I think you've been in the field too long. You need to come in, immediately." Something cold settled in Elena's stomach. In the background of the call, she could hear muffled voices, the sound of movement. Too much activity for Harrison's usual quiet office. "Where are you, Director?" "I'm at headquarters, of course." "Elena, I'm going to ask you directly. What is your current location?" Marcus was suddenly beside her, his hand reaching for the phone. She saw the warning in his eyes just as she heard it, the faint whir of rotors in the distance. "I have to go, sir." Elena ended the call and powered down the phone, but Marcus was already pulling the battery free. "Too late," he said grimly, pointing toward the sky. Two black helicopters crested the ridge behind them, moving fast and low. Elena could see figures in tactical gear rappelling from ropes before the aircraft even touched down. "This way," Marcus said, grabbing her hand. "How deep does this go?" she gasped as they vaulted over a fallen log. "Deep enough that your director just tried to get you killed," Marcus replied without breaking stride. They emerged at the edge of a steep ravine. Marcus didn't hesitate, beginning his descent down what Elena generously decided to call a trail. Loose rocks scattered under their feet, and she could hear the tactical teams crashing through the underbrush above. There, Marcus pointed to a dark opening in the rock face below. "Natural cave system. They'll have thermal imaging, but the mineral deposits in these rocks should mask our signatures." As they reached the cave entrance, Elena's phone, still powered down, began to vibrate. Then Marcus's backup device started buzzing too. "They're tracking the hardware itself," she realized, "not just the signal." Without hesitation, Marcus hurled both devices into the ravine. They clattered against the rocks far below, just as the first tactical team appeared at the ridge above. Inside the cave, darkness swallowed them completely. Marcus produced a small LED light, keeping it pointed downward and shielded. The cave extended deeper than Elena had expected, with passages branching off in multiple directions. "You've been here before," she observed. "I've been mapping these mountains for years. Always good to know your escape routes." His voice was calm, but Elena could hear the undercurrent of anger. "They burned everything, Elena. 5 years of work, gone. We can rebuild." With what? The research data, the prototypes, the proof of concept, all of it was in that workshop. Marcus stopped walking and turned to face her. "Without physical evidence, who's going to believe us? A disgraced federal agent and a hermit claiming that one of America's largest corporations is committing murder." Elena opened her mouth to argue, then stopped. He was right. She was probably considered a rogue agent now, possibly even a suspect in Morrison's death. Any evidence they might gather would be dismissed as fabrication. From outside, they could hear the tactical teams spreading out, their voices echoing off the canyon walls, dogs barking, the sound of equipment being deployed. "There's something else," Elena said quietly. "Before this started, I was investigating a pattern. Other people who've disappeared or died after making discoveries that threatened Meridian's interests. Scientists, activists, even a geological surveyor who found something he shouldn't have." Marcus's light went dark. In the absolute blackness of the cave, Elena felt his presence move closer. "Then this isn't just about stopping us," he whispered. "This is about making sure the truth dies with us." Outside, the voices were getting closer. The corporate jet touched down at the small regional airport, just as dawn broke over the Montana peaks. Elena watched through the terminal window as 3 figures in expensive suits emerged, their movements sharp and purposeful despite the early hour. She recognized the lead figure from the photograph Sarah had shown her, Richard Blackwood, Titan Industries head of special operations. "They're here," she whispered into her phone. Marcus's voice crackled through the connection. How many? 3. They look like they mean business. Elena stepped back from the window as one of the men glanced toward the terminal. Marcus, maybe we should... No, we stick to the plan. Get back to the valley and help Sarah with the documentation. Everything needs to be uploaded before they reach us. Elena hurried to her truck, her heart hammering against her ribs. The past 12 hours had been a blur of revelation and preparation. Marcus had explained everything. The breakthrough in his energy system, the connection to Dr. Harrison's research, and why Titan Industries considered him such a threat. The technology Marcus had developed could indeed revolutionize sustainable living, but more importantly, it could devastate the fossil fuel industry overnight. As she drove toward the valley, Elena's mind raced through the implications. The water wheel Marcus had built was just the visible component. The real innovation lay in the quantum resonance chambers he'd constructed underground using principles that Harrison had died trying to protect. The system could generate enough clean energy to power a small city using nothing but the valley's natural water flow. Meanwhile, in the valley, Sarah worked frantically at her laptop, uploading files to multiple cloud servers and academic institutions worldwide. Marcus moved between his various installations, making final adjustments and activating emergency protocols he'd hoped never to use. The resonance chambers are locked down, he called to Sarah. Even if they destroy the surface components, the underground system will remain intact. Good, because I'm picking up radio chatter. They're not alone. There's a whole team coming. Sarah's fingers flew across the keyboard. I've sent the technical specifications to 12 universities and 3 environmental organizations. The cat's out of the bag now. Marcus nodded grimly. Harrison would be proud. The sound of vehicles echoed through the valley. Multiple engines approaching fast. Marcus and Sarah exchanged glances. They'd run out of time. Marcus Stone, Blackwood called out, his voice carrying across the water. I think it's time we had a proper conversation. Marcus stepped forward, placing himself between the newcomers and his installations. About what? Building codes? Environmental permits? Or are we discussing the murder of Dr. Elizabeth Harrison? Blackwood's expression didn't change, but several of the tactical team shifted nervously. Davidson's eyes widened. Careful with your accusations, Mr. Stone. Dr. Harrison's death was a tragic accident. Tragic, maybe. Accidental? No. Sarah emerged from behind the wheelhouse, laptop still in hand. We have her complete research files, including her final communication with the EPA. She knew you were coming for her. Miss Chen, I presume. Blackwood's smile was razor-thin, the investigative journalist. I trust you understand the national security implications of what you've stumbled into here. The only security being threatened is your bottom line, Sarah shot back. This technology could end energy poverty worldwide. That's what really scares you. Elena's truck roared into the clearing, kicking up dust and gravel. She jumped out, phone raised high, live-streaming everything. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a situation here in the Montana wilderness. Titan Industries has just arrived with what appears to be a private military force to intimidate a construction worker whose only crime was trying to help his community. Blackwood's composure finally cracked. Turn that off. Now. This is still America, Elena replied, not lowering the phone. Public land, freedom of speech, and about 10,000 people watching this live stream. Sheriff Davidson stepped forward, holstering his weapon. Now hold on just a minute. Whatever's happening here, it's going to be done legally and above board. Mr. Blackwood, I was told you had a warrant. The warrant is being processed, Blackwood said tightly. In the meantime, we have reason to believe Mr. Stone has been conducting illegal experiments with potentially dangerous technology. Marcus laughed, a sound devoid of humor. Dangerous? The only thing dangerous about this technology is what it does to your profit margins. Every kilowatt hour this system generates is one less barrel of oil you can sell. The standoff stretched taut, both sides aware they'd reached a critical moment. The morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the valley that Marcus had transformed from wilderness into wonder. In the distance, the water wheel continued its patient revolution, generating power that could light the future, if they lived long enough to see it. The sound of approaching helicopters cut through the morning air like mechanical wasps, their rotors beating a steady rhythm that made Sarah's chest tighten with dread. She stood beside Marcus in the central hub of his valley sanctuary, watching through the reinforced windows as 3 black aircraft descended toward the meadow beyond the tree line. "How long do we have?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Marcus checked the tablet displaying feeds from his perimeter cameras. 20 minutes, maybe less. They'll try to surround us first, establish a perimeter before moving in. Dr. Chen emerged from the laboratory section, a sealed metal case in her hands. The data samples are ready. Everything BlackRock tried to bury is documented here. The pollution readings, the cover-up emails, the falsified environmental reports. She paused, meeting Marcus's eyes. "This is bigger than we thought. The mining operation they're planning would poison the water table for 3 states. Outside, the helicopters had landed, disgorging figures in dark tactical gear who immediately began spreading out with military precision. Sarah counted at least a dozen men, all armed, moving with the coordinated efficiency of a private security force that operated far beyond the reach of local law enforcement. "The emergency protocols?" Marcus asked, his fingers dancing across a control panel built into the hub's central console. "Already activated," Chen replied. "Remote backups are uploading to servers in 3 different countries. Even if they destroy everything here, the evidence will survive." The radio crackled to life with Tom's voice from his position on the ridge above. "They've got more vehicles coming up the access road. Black SUVs, government plates, but I'm betting they're not government." Marcus nodded grimly. He'd always known this moment would come, had prepared for it during those long months of construction. Every system in the valley had redundancies. Every critical component had been designed to survive what was about to happen. "Sarah, there's something you need to know," he said, turning from the control panel. "That night 6 months ago when I disappeared into the wilderness, I wasn't running away from something, I was running toward it." She stared at him, confusion flickering across her features. "What do you mean?" The pieces began falling into place in Sarah's mind. "You built all this as a trap." "Not a trap," Marcus corrected. "A demonstration. Living proof of what this land could become if corporations like BlackRock weren't allowed to destroy it for profit." His expression hardened. "And a fortress to protect the evidence until the right people could see it." Through the windows, they could see the tactical team establishing positions around the valley's perimeter, professional, methodical, deadly serious about their mission. Chen sealed her case and handed it to Sarah. "There's a tunnel system beneath the laboratory. Marcus showed me yesterday. It leads to a cave network that connects to the old mining shafts on the far side of the mountain." "I'm not leaving you here," Sarah said firmly. "Yes, you are," Marcus replied, his tone brooking no argument. "This was always going to be my fight. But the evidence, that's bigger than any of us. Chen's research combined with what I've documented about BlackRock's activities could expose a conspiracy that reaches into the highest levels of government." The radio erupted with Tom's urgent voice. "They're moving in. Armed team approaching from the north, another from the south. You've got maybe 5 minutes." Marcus led them toward a concealed panel in the hub's floor. When it slid open, it revealed a narrow tunnel disappearing into darkness, equipped with emergency lighting and ventilation systems. "The tunnel branches 3 ways about a mile in," he explained rapidly. "Take the left branch. It leads to the old Copper Ridge mine. Tom's truck is hidden there with enough fuel to get you to Great Falls." Sarah hesitated at the tunnel entrance, looking back at the man who had become so much more than a story to her. "What will you tell them when they get here?" Marcus smiled, but there was steel in his eyes. "The truth. That sometimes the only way to protect something worth saving is to make sure the whole world is watching when someone tries to destroy it." The sound of approaching footsteps echoed from outside, heavy boots on wooden walkways, tactical teams moving with practiced precision toward their target. Chen had already descended into the tunnel. Sarah grabbed Marcus's hand one last time. "Don't let them win." "They already lost," he replied. "They just don't know it yet." The encrypted files Sarah had discovered painted a picture more disturbing than any of them had imagined. As dawn broke over Marcus's valley, she sat hunched over her laptop in the main cabin, cross-referencing corporate documents with geological surveys, while Detective Chen and Marcus pored over printed pages spread across the dining table. "Meridian Industries knew about the aquifer system 15 years ago," Sarah said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "They've been systematically buying up land rights across 3 counties, not for development, but to control water access." Marcus looked up from a legal document, his weathered face grim. "That explains why they kept approaching me about selling. I thought they wanted the land for some resort project." "It's bigger than that," Chen interjected, tapping a finger on a map marked with red circles. "Look at this pattern. Every property they've acquired sits on or near underground water sources. They're not just controlling what's here, they're planning to control what isn't." Sarah pulled up another file, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "According to their internal projections, this region will be one of the last reliable freshwater sources in the western states within 20 years. Climate change, drought, over-extraction from major aquifers. It's all here in their environmental impact studies." The implications settled over them like a heavy blanket. Marcus stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the pristine stream that wound through his property. "So, while everyone else is running out of water, they'll own the reserves. And charge whatever they want for access," Chen added. "It's not just about profit, it's about power. Control the water, control everything else." A new voice cut through the morning air, the distinctive whine of helicopter rotors approaching fast. All 3 of them rushed to the window, watching as a sleek black aircraft descended toward the clearing near the workshop. "That's not a news helicopter," Marcus said, reaching for the rifle he'd started keeping close since the first break-to-in attempt. Chen was already on her radio, calling for backup, but they all knew help was at least 30 minutes away. The helicopter touched down, and 4 figures in dark suits emerged, moving with military precision toward the buildings. "The back trail," Marcus said urgently, grabbing a backpack he'd prepared for this possibility. "There's a cave system about half a mile up the ridge. We can—" The front door exploded inward in a shower of splinters. The first man through wore expensive sunglasses and carried himself like someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. "Mr. Stone," the man said pleasantly, as if he'd been invited for coffee. "I'm David Meridian. We need to talk." Chen stepped forward, her hand resting on her weapon. "This is private property, and you just committed breaking and entering." Meridian's smile never wavered. "Detective Chen, isn't it? I'm afraid you'll find that Meridian Industries now holds the mineral and water rights to this property. A recent acquisition. He produced a legal document from his jacket. Everything Mr. Stone has built here is technically on our land." "That's impossible," Marcus said, but uncertainty flickered in his eyes. Sarah had been quietly working on her laptop throughout the confrontation. Now she looked up with an expression of cold fury. "Fraudulent documents filed yesterday in Helena, backdated to appear legitimate. I'm guessing you have people in the county recorder's office." One of Meridian's companions whispered something in his ear, and his pleasant demeanor cracked slightly. "Miss Chen, the journalist, not the detective. You've been quite busy with our confidential files. Files that show your company has been manipulating water rights across the western states," Sarah shot back. "Wait until the public sees what you're planning." Meridian gestured almost casually, and 2 of his men moved to flank the group. "I'm afraid that won't be happening. You see, there was a terrible accident during the demolition of this illegal settlement, an explosion, possibly from poorly stored materials. Very tragic." The threat hung in the air like smoke from a fire. Chen's hand moved toward her weapon, but she was outnumbered and outgunned. That's when they heard the sound, a low rumble that seemed to come from the earth itself. Meridian frowned, looking around uncertainly as the floor beneath them began to vibrate. Marcus allowed himself a small smile. "You might want to reconsider your demolition plan, Mr. Meridian. See, when I built this place, I made sure it was integrated with the natural water systems. Disturb one part, and you affect the whole network. The rumbling grew louder, and through the broken doorway they could see water beginning to bubble up from the ground near the helicopter. "What did you do?" Meridian demanded, his composure finally cracking. "Nothing yet," Marcus replied, "but I can. One switch, and your entire water extraction operation in this valley becomes worthless. The aquifer will reroute itself through limestone channels I've mapped. You'll be left with dry holes and a lot of explaining to do to your investors." The standoff stretched taut as a wire, with the sound of rising water in the background. The satellite phone crackled to life at 3:17 a.m., jarring Sarah from restless sleep. Marcus's voice cut through the static, urgent and breathless. "They found us. You need to get everyone out, now." Sarah bolted upright, her heart hammering against her ribs. Through the cabin window she could see the faint glow of Marcus's compound in the distance, but something was wrong. The usual soft illumination from his bioluminescent arrays was flickering erratically. "Marcus, what's happening?" "Drones. 3 of them, maybe more. They've been circling for the past hour. Military grade, not the kind Peterson's people would have access to." His voice was strained, interrupted by what sounded like equipment being hastily moved. "This is bigger than we thought." Sarah was already pulling on her boots, her mind racing. The research team had been scheduled to arrive at dawn to document Marcus's revolutionary water purification system. Dr. Chen had driven up from Bozeman with 2 graduate students, and they were sleeping in the guest quarters, barely a quarter-mile from the main compound. "Where are you now?" "Underground. The tunnels I showed you last week. Sarah, listen carefully. In my desk, there's a red folder. Everything's in there. Patent applications, test results, the correspondence with Meridian Corp. If something happens to me..." "Nothing's going to happen to you." But even as she said it, the drone of rotors began to penetrate the pre-dawn quiet. Helicopters, multiple aircraft approaching fast from the east. "Get that folder and get out. Take the old mining road through Copper Canyon. It's the only route they won't be watching." Sarah grabbed her jacket and sprinted across the compound. The main building's door stood ajar, and she could see the chaos inside. Overturned furniture, scattered papers, the emergency lighting casting everything in hellish red. Marcus had clearly left in a hurry. She found the folder exactly where he'd said it would be. The contents made her blood run cold. Page after page of technical specifications, chemical formulas, and most damning of all, a series of emails between Meridian Corporation executives discussing something called Project Clean Water, a plan to corner the market on water purification technology by eliminating competing innovations. The helicopter sounds were growing louder. Sarah stuffed the folder inside her jacket and ran toward the guest quarters, but she was too late. Dark figures were already moving between the buildings, their silhouettes barely visible against the starlight. Professional, military precision. She ducked behind the workshop, her breath coming in sharp puffs in the cold mountain air. Through the small window, she could see 3 men in tactical gear, setting up what looked like sophisticated monitoring equipment. They weren't here to destroy the compound, they were here to steal it. The satellite phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, Cache Point 7. 1 hour. Come alone. Cache Point 7 was an abandoned mine shaft 2 miles up the ridge. Marcus had shown her the location during one of their early surveys, back when she'd still thought he was just another drifter with grandiose dreams. Now she understood he'd been preparing for this moment all along. Sarah began to work her way around the perimeter, staying low and moving from shadow to shadow. The intruders seemed focused on the main laboratory building where Marcus kept his primary research. They hadn't discovered the underground network yet, but it was only a matter of time. She was 50 yards from the tree line when the explosion lit up the valley. The blast knocked her to the ground, her ears ringing as debris rained down around her. When she looked back, the laboratory was engulfed in flames. Whether Marcus had triggered it himself or the intruders had gone too far, the result was the same. Months of irreplaceable research disappearing into smoke and ash. But the red folder pressed against her ribs told a different story. Marcus had been more careful than anyone realized. The real innovations, the breakthrough discoveries that could revolutionize how humanity approached sustainability, they weren't just in one location. He'd been documenting everything, creating backups, preparing for exactly this scenario. The helicopter rotors were directly overhead now, searchlights sweeping the compound in systematic patterns. Sarah used the chaos and noise as cover, slipping into the forest just as armed figures began to spread out from the landing zone. She had 57 minutes to reach the cache point. 57 minutes to find Marcus and figure out how to expose Meridian Corporation's involvement before they could clean up the evidence and disappear. The mining road stretched ahead, barely visible in the darkness. Somewhere behind her, Dr. Chen and the graduate students were probably being questioned, their equipment confiscated, their research corrupted or destroyed. But Marcus was still alive. The folder was safe, and Sarah Martinez, who had started this journey as a skeptical documentary filmmaker, now carried the proof that could bring down one of the most powerful corporations in the energy sector. The real fight was just beginning. The helicopter blades sliced through the dawn air, their rhythmic thunder echoing off the valley walls. Marcus pressed himself deeper into the shadow of the rocky outcropping, watching the black aircraft circle his settlement like a mechanical vulture. Through the trees he could see armed figures rappelling down ropes, their tactical gear gleaming in the early light. Sarah's hand found his arm, her grip tight with fear. "How many?" she whispered. 8, maybe 10. Marcus's jaw clenched as he watched the soldiers fan out across his carefully constructed paradise. 6 months of backbreaking work, of pouring his soul into every solar panel and water filtration system, and they were treating it like a crime scene. The radio in his pocket crackled to life. "Stone, we know you're out there." The voice was calm, professional, tinged with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "This doesn't have to end badly. We just want to talk." Marcus almost laughed at the absurdity. Men with automatic weapons dropping from the sky rarely wanted to chat about the weather. He'd seen enough corporate security operations during his years in construction to recognize a cleanup crew when he saw one. "They're checking the workshop," Sarah observed, her voice barely audible above the helicopter's roar. Through the scope of Marcus's rifle, they watched 2 figures emerge from the main building, one speaking rapidly into a radio. The response came immediately. "Torch it. All of it." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He watched in horror as the soldiers began methodically placing incendiary devices throughout his settlement. The solar arrays that had taken weeks to position perfectly, the greenhouse where Sarah had started growing vegetables with seeds saved from town, the water purification system that could have provided clean drinking water for hundreds of people. "We have to stop them," he said, raising the rifle. Sarah's hand closed over the barrel, pushing it down. "There are too many. It's suicide." She was right, but that didn't make it easier to watch. The first flames erupted from the workshop, orange tongues licking hungrily at the wooden beams. Then the main cabin caught, smoke billowing into the morning sky. The soldiers worked with practiced efficiency, destroying in minutes what had taken months to create. Marcus's radio crackled again. "Dr. Sarah Chen, we know you're with him." The voice had changed to come more personal. "Your research was promising, but you've aligned yourself with the wrong people. Last chance to come in peacefully." Sarah's face went pale. "They know my name." "Who are they?" Marcus demanded. "What research?" Before Sarah could answer, an explosion rocked the valley. The helicopter had fired a missile into the solar array, sending twisted metal and glass cascading down the hillside. The message was clear. Nothing would remain. "The prototype," Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with realization. "They're after the prototype." Marcus grabbed her shoulders. "What prototype? What haven't you told me?" Tears streamed down her face as she watched the settlement burn. The water purification system. It wasn't just for cleaning drinking water. I modified it, enhanced it. It can break down industrial pollutants, chemical waste, things the corporations dump into rivers and groundwater. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. They can't let that technology get out. It would cost them billions in cleanup costs. Regulatory compliance, industries would have to actually clean up their mess instead of just moving it downstream. Sarah's voice was thick with guilt and anger. I thought we were far enough away that no one would find us. The radio erupted with activity. Movement in Sector 7, 2 figures heading northwest. Marcus cursed under his breath. Somehow they'd been spotted. The helicopter banked sharply, its searchlight sweeping across the tree line as it moved to intercept them. "Run," he said, grabbing Sarah's hand. They crashed through the undergrowth, branches tearing at their clothes as bullets whined overhead. The helicopter's downwash bent the trees violently, creating a maelstrom of leaves and debris. Behind them, shouts echoed as the ground team gave chase. Marcus pulled Sarah toward the river, where the water might mask their heat signature from the helicopter's thermal imaging, but as they broke from the tree cover, armed figures emerged from the opposite bank. They were surrounded. The helicopter settled into a hover 50 feet above the water, its rotor wash churning the river into foam. Soldiers approached from both sides, weapons trained on them with deadly precision. "End of the line, Stone," the voice called from a loudspeaker. "Dr. Chen, step away from him. You still have value to us." Marcus felt Sarah tremble beside him. In the distance, smoke from their destroyed settlement painted the sky black. Everything they'd built, every hope for a different way of living, reduced to ash and twisted metal. But as he looked into Sarah's eyes, Marcus saw something that gave him hope, a fierce determination that matched his own. They might have destroyed his settlement, but the knowledge, the proof that another way was possible, still lived in their minds. The real fight was just beginning. The corporate helicopters circled like mechanical vultures against the dawn sky as Marcus led the evacuation deeper into the valley. The sound of their rotors echoed off the canyon walls, a metallic heartbeat that seemed to pulse with menace. Behind them, smoke still rose from the research facility where Dr. Sarah Chen had made her final stand. "How much further?" gasped Elena Rodriguez, the investigative journalist who had first broken the story about Petromax's cover-up. She clutched a waterproof case containing the only remaining copies of Chen's research data. Marcus checked his GPS device, one of the few pieces of modern technology he'd kept in his sustainable compound. 2 miles to the emergency cache. We can hole up there until... The crack of rifle fire cut through the morning air. Bark exploded from a pine tree inches from Elena's head. Marcus grabbed her arm and pulled her behind a boulder as more shots rang out. "They're not trying to kill us," Marcus realized, scanning the ridgeline where muzzle flashes flickered. "They're herding us." Tom Bradley, the sheriff who had initially dismissed Marcus as a deranged hermit, crawled up beside them. His uniform was torn and dirty from the night's escape. "Herding us where?" Marcus felt ice form in his stomach as understanding dawned, away from the compound, away from the evidence. Through the trees, he could see smoke rising from a new location, not the research facility this time, but from the direction of his carefully constructed sustainable village. 6 months of work, 6 months of proving that humanity could live in harmony with nature while maintaining modern comforts, was going up in flames. "Those bastards," Elena whispered, following his gaze. "They're destroying everything. The solar arrays, the geothermal systems, the water purification." Marcus's voice trailed off, but then his jaw hardened. "They think they're destroying the evidence, but they don't know about the backup." Sheriff Bradley looked confused. "What backup?" Marcus was already moving, staying low behind the rocks. Dr. Chen wasn't just researching in that facility, she was building. The whole compound was a prototype, but she built a second system underground, a proof of concept that could power a small city using the same principles that expose Petromax's suppression of clean energy patents. Another volley of shots drove them further from the burning compound, but Marcus was now moving with purpose. He led them along a game trail that wound deeper into the valley, past the obvious paths toward a section of seemingly undisturbed forest. "Here," he said, pulling aside what looked like natural ground cover to reveal a concrete hatch, Chen's real laboratory. The underground facility was larger than the one they'd escaped from, carved into the living rock of the mountain. Emergency lighting flickered on as they descended, powered by the geothermal tap Chen had engineered into a natural hot spring. Banks of computers hummed quietly, their screens displaying real-time data from monitoring stations throughout the valley. "Oh my God," Elena breathed, her camera already documenting everything. "This is what they're really trying to hide." The central display showed energy output readings that defied conventional understanding. Chen's fusion of Marcus's sustainable construction techniques with cutting-edge clean energy technology had created something unprecedented. A completely self-sustaining system that produced more energy than it consumed. "The patents Petromax buried," Marcus explained, his fingers flying over Chen's interface. "She found them all. Solar efficiency improvements, battery storage breakthroughs, geothermal enhancement techniques. They've been sitting on technology that could have revolutionized energy production 20 years ago." Sheriff Bradley studied the financial documents Elena was photographing. The money trail leads everywhere. Politicians, regulatory agencies, environmental groups they've been bribing to stay quiet. "Not just bribing," Elena said grimly, pointing to another file. "Look at this. Scientists who got too close to breakthroughs. Activists who couldn't be bought. The pattern goes back decades." The sound of explosions echoed from above, muffled by rock, but still powerful enough to shake dust from the ceiling. Marcus checked the external cameras and saw Petromax security teams systematically destroying every visible structure in his compound. "They think they're winning," he said quietly. "But Chen designed this place to be completely independent. Solar collectors disguised as natural rock formations, geothermal taps that look like hot springs, data transmission through secure satellite uplinks they can't trace." Elena was already uploading files to her news organization's secure servers. "The world needs to see this, not just the environmental implications, but the human cost. How many people died because clean energy was suppressed? How many communities were destroyed by pollution that could have been prevented?" Marcus watched his life's work burn on the monitors, but felt something he hadn't experienced in months of hiding in the wilderness: hope. The visible compound had been a proof of concept, but this underground facility was the real revolution. "They can burn the valley," he said, beginning the startup sequence for Chen's master prototype. "But they can't stop what we've learned." Above them, corporate soldiers searched through ashes, thinking they had won. Below, the future was quietly beginning to power itself. The morning sun cast long shadows across the valley as Marcus stood at the edge of his creation, watching the last of the corporate security team's vehicles disappear down the mountain road. The FBI had taken Dr. Chen and 3 other executives into custody, their faces pale with the knowledge that their decades-long conspiracy had finally unraveled. Sarah approached from behind, her footsteps soft on the sustainable concrete pathways Marcus had engineered. "The reporters want to know when they can start filming the detailed segments about the technology." Marcus turned, his weathered hands still trembling slightly from the adrenaline of the past 24 hours. "Soon. But first, we need to make sure this knowledge gets distributed properly. Too many people have died to keep these innovations buried." The settlement buzzed with activity as engineers, environmental scientists, and documentary crews worked alongside the original volunteers who had helped Marcus build his vision. Elena Rodriguez emerged from the water purification facility, her tablet filled with measurements and specifications that would soon be shared with communities worldwide. "The efficiency ratings are even better than we initially calculated," she called out, her voice carrying across the compound. "This single system could provide clean water for a town of 10,000 people." Marcus nodded, but his expression remained somber. The weight of Tom Brennan's sacrifice, along with the knowledge of how many other whistleblowers had been silenced over the years, cast a shadow over their victory. The corporations had murdered to protect their profits, and even now he wondered how many other revolutionary technologies lay buried in unmarked graves alongside their creators. Sheriff Morrison's radio crackled as he coordinated with federal agents processing the crime scene at the cabin where Marcus had been held. "We found documentation going back 15 years, he reported. Companies systematically acquiring patents just to shelve them, bribing officials, even orchestrating accidents for inventors who wouldn't sell out. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. Dr. Chen had broken completely during interrogation, revealing a network that extended across multiple industries and government agencies. The sustainable building materials, the water purification system, the energy storage technology, all of it represented not just environmental solutions, but economic disruption that threatened billions in corporate profits. Marcus walked through his settlement, observing how naturally people had adapted to living within its systems. Children played near the bioremediation gardens, while their parents learned to operate the recycling processes. The homes maintained comfortable temperatures without traditional heating or cooling, powered by an elegant combination of solar collection, thermal mass, and innovative airflow design. "Mr. Stone," a young journalist approached, her camera operator trailing behind. "Can you explain how you knew these technologies would work together so seamlessly?" He paused, considering his words carefully. "I didn't build this to prove a point about technology. I built it to prove a point about possibility. Every innovation here existed in some form, but scattered across different research projects, different companies, different countries. The corporations didn't just suppress individual inventions, they suppressed integration. As the day progressed, the settlement transformed into an impromptu conference center. Video calls connected them with environmental groups, government officials, and investors from around the world. The documentation seized from Dr. Chen's files was already being analyzed, revealing patent portfolios worth hundreds of billions of dollars that had been deliberately kept dormant. Sarah coordinated the media response, while Marcus worked with Elena and other experts to prepare comprehensive technical specifications for public release. They had decided to make everything open source, ensuring that no single entity could control or suppress the innovations again. "The first replication sites are already being planned," Sarah announced during their evening meeting. 3 universities want to build full-scale versions for research and demonstration. The UN Environmental Council is fast-tracking a resolution to provide funding for developing nations to implement the water purification systems. Marcus stood at his workshop window as darkness fell across the valley, but the settlement remained gently illuminated by its integrated lighting systems. 6 months ago, he had retreated to this wilderness carrying only blueprints and hope. The madman the townspeople had whispered about had emerged with something that could reshape how humanity lived on the planet. His satellite phone rang, a call from the first international delegation requesting permission to visit and study the settlement. As he answered, Marcus realized that his isolation was truly over. The quiet construction worker who had disappeared into the mountains would never exist again. But watching the sustainable community function around him, seeing families living comfortably while treading lightly on the earth, he felt something he hadn't experienced since childhood, genuine optimism about the future. The corporations had spent decades convincing the world that environmental protection required sacrifice and suffering. Marcus Stone had built proof that they were wrong. The valley that had hidden him now stood ready to change the world, one innovation at a time. And this time, no amount of corporate power could stuff the knowledge back into darkness.